now for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Welcome to News for Utah Plus this week. I am your host, Lindsay Aerts. Thank you for joining us. Hope you like our new boxes set up today. This is a fun new look we're trying. So if you're listening via podcast, I invite you to go watch this video. It's on YouTube. It's on our News for Utah Plus app, which is on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. I want to welcome in my host today, Taylor Morgan and Leah Murray. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
It is good to be with you. When we look sideways, it's because we're all sitting next to each other. But we're really looking in boxes. So this is new for us. We hope you like it too. Also want to bring in producer Peter. Hi, producer Peter.
Hi, everybody.
Yay, there's a fourth
I'm in
box.
equal box.
Yes.
I used to feel bad because I would come up and take equal space as y'all
Right.
on the stream, and it'd be like, hello, the producer is here. I'd like to interrupt.
Peter, you
no,
deserve
I'm happy
an
with
equal
the four
box.
Oh, well,
you
thank
do.
you.
You guys don't
I'd
even
also
know.
like to invite everyone. So, Lindsay, you were talking about the configuration of the desk a little bit. Here's a little behind-the-scenes look. This is our bird's eye cam where you can kind of see everybody. Give a quick wave.
Hi.
I'm back here hiding behind the TV. But that's what we're working with today. It's a bit of a different look, but you know, it's fun to put something new together.
I love us. This looks so good. Okay, I appreciate you, producer Peter. All right, Taylor Morgan, Leah Murray, introduce yourselves. Tell us who you are.
I'm Leah Murray, political science professor up at Weber State University and director of the Walker Institute of Politics and Public Service.
Such a gentleman, Taylor, for letting her go first.
Of course.
Yeah.
Taylor Morgan, partner at Morgan May Public Affairs. We're a local lobbying, political consulting, communications firm.
Okay, we are so glad you're here. Let's dive in, producer Peter, and you tell me if anything's going wrong here. That's how this works. All right, so as we're recording this today, in the last hour, we just got an update from prosecutors in Utah County that they will seek the death penalty against Tyler Robinson. He is the 22-year-old suspected of shooting and killing political commenter Charlie Kirk. Guys, I want your take on this after you kind of learn some of these allegations that prosecutors are alleging. What do you make of all this? And we haven't really talked since Utah kind of became in the forefront of the national spotlight and the Charlie Kirk killing. So just tell me all your thoughts about how this has impacted you guys.
I think first and foremost, I think it is so important that this case be tried in a court of law and not just in the court of public opinion. So I have a lot of respect and appreciation today for the prosecutor and for the attorney general today saying that there are a lot of facts and some information about the suspect that we will not be releasing in order to protect the case. That case should play out in court. Of course, those of us in the political space and in the media, we would love to have all the details and all the information. And certainly what we did here at the press conference today, I think was very insightful, and we'll perhaps get to some of those details. But first and foremost, I think it's important that we treat this as a criminal case, that we respect the process and let that play out.
Yeah, Leah, how has, going back to the beginning, how has this impacted you? And as you hear about charges today, what do you think about?
Right, so I just want to say, as someone who brings speakers to campus a lot, one of my roles at Walker Institute is bringing ideas. I very much think the campus is a free marketplace of ideas. I very much think everyone should feel safe to debate and hear things that they don't want to hear and learn how to have arguments in this world. And a little bit, I've been heartsick for the last week because it's really hits close to home. A lot of people who I work with bring speakers to campus, right? And all of us are, concerned about what's happening and what it says about political speech in our country and what we're trying to teach our students, which is be able to freely engage with ideas. I was so appreciative, just like Taylor was, of the prosecuting attorney listening earlier out of Utah County, talking about this is the rule of law, right? Not the rule of public opinion, that we are going to go based on what our Constitution says. I love the explanation in that about it's a preliminary trial, not a grand jury trial, knowing that this is a national conversation about how we how do I say, still implement our expectations and our criminal code and not answer to maybe what is the worst feelings, right? If you're so upset and angry, but actually still implementing what it means to be an American constitutional system.
Yeah, that is really important too. And as we listened to the Utah County prosecutor kind of outline what evidence they had, it did sort of correct the public record that we've already heard, right? Some of these allegations that, his father turned him in. It turns out it was his mother, according to prosecutors, that turned him in, and a family friend who was a former Washington County deputy who was able to kind of convince him to turn himself in, right? So we learned some of those tweaks where I think just some of the comments we had from even Governor Cox, right, just kind of saying things on the Sunday morning talk shows, we sort of learned some of the facts that corrected that record. And I want to play for you guys one excerpt. This is the Utah County prosecutor, Jeff Gray, going through a list of messages between Tyler Robinson, the accused shooter, and then his roommate, who prosecutors say was a male transitioning to a female, and that Robinson and they were in a romantic relationship.
Roommate, why? Robinson, why did I do it? Roommate, yeah. Robinson, I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out.
So there it is. We're kind of hearing what prosecutors allege may have been a motive for this. Taylor, what do you make of those comments from Jeff Gray?
It's difficult to process. There's so much to this. I think my initial thoughts were speech is never violence, right? And I think it's really problematic when we equate hateful speech to violence. Now, getting down the rabbit hole of what is hateful speech and where those boundaries lie, I think all of us as a country, regardless of what party we're in, we perhaps all need to take a step back and instead of dismissing each other, instead of canceling speech, instead of just labeling speech as hateful or offensive or this or that, we need to be willing to engage, and we need to be able to disagree and refute speech, even hateful speech. I think it's so important that if somebody does say something offensive or hateful, correct that speech. Let's engage in a debate rather than just dismissing it and canceling and tuning out. We have to be willing to engage in free speech or with speech, even when we find it deeply offensive or hateful. Now, some other things we learned about the alleged shooter at the press conference today. We learned a little bit about his radicalization that has happened fairly recently, according to officials. This is something that happened really over the last year or so, and it happened as the suspect retreated from public life, retreated from college, spent more and more time in, his silo, his echo chamber on Discord and, playing video games. That is where essentially and how this person, this alleged shooter, became radicalized. If we are all willing to maybe put down our phones and talk to each other in real life, as Governor Cox said, maybe touch grass, right? Look each other in the eye face to face and have conversations with real humans in real time, in real life, then I can't imagine that we would allow something like this violence to happen if we're talking to each other face to face.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that I used the word motive with that. Prosecutors didn't say this is what we believe is the motive, but I think it's fair to summarize that they were explaining why perhaps Tyler Robinson may have done this. Leah, what do you make of those comments where he's saying, I've had enough of his hate?
Right. How did he say that the hate is not, I can't negotiate it with it anymore? Right. One thing I do want to say really clearly is you don't have to actually negotiate. So you do hear me and Taylor saying, right, you should be engaging and, these are free marketplace of ideas, but you actually don't have to. One thing I teach my students is you can choose to disengage, right? So if someone is saying something, you're like, I just don't have it in me today to engage in this conversation or to have this argument. But what I also want to say is it is never okay to choose political violence. If someone is saying something that you disagree with, even if you've decided I don't want to negotiate anymore, the actual correct response to Charlie Kirk would be to organize your own youth movement and get someone elected who would then be approving of your policy positions. In America, there's no reason ever to choose political violence because we're going to vote. I mean, every 2, 4, 6 years, we're going to vote for someone new. Just do the political work. You do not have to make this choice.
And that goes to Taylor's point on potential radicalization, right? Because there are a lot of people out there who have publicly said, I also think Charlie Kirk's speech was inflammatory or whatever, but they didn't choose to shoot him.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Okay, speaking of sort of this speech theme that we're kind of on, and your guys' perspective on this, I want your perspective on another angle of this speech. We know that in recent days, some folks have been fired from their jobs for speaking out against, against Charlie Kirk, right? And sort of making that point that maybe his speech was a little bit inflammatory. What do you guys make of those firings? Are those okay? Does the First Amendment protect those? What do you think on that?
I mean, I think if it's a private industry, what we were reading on this, right, Lindsay? If I think that you've said something at ABC, it's a private business, and it reflects poorly on ABC, quite frankly, the boss gets to fire you. Free speech is not a blanket guarantee, right? I don't get to say all the things.
Free speech doesn't come without consequences.
That's right. There are consequences. So I do think I haven't seen that anyone has been fired in public space, right? I feel like all of the firings were private. So a little bit, I think the First Amendment doesn't apply, but please correct me if I'm getting that wrong.
Well, I do want to correct you. Producer Peter, maybe you can correct me. I believe there were some state employees, not Utah state employees, but a political pundit, a university employee, a sports reporter, and a U.S. Secret Service agent.
There were several cases where, yes, there are people who worked for entities that are either public or quasi-public, where I think there could be a wider conversation to be had about, where is the line
so
in this
that,
person keeping their job.
Yeah, Peter, sorry.
I don't have the exact examples in front of me. That list that you gave sounds correct, but I was going to step in to say, yes, there have been some cases of state or federal workers.
Well, and so that kind of begs my next question. The First Amendment protects, and correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Murray, in my mind, the First Amendment protects the government from retaliating against you because of your speech. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so where these people are government employees, does that bring a different conversation than they were fired because their private employer didn't like their speech?
But even there, so I think on the private, I'm going to stand with what I said, right? Like private companies got to do that. But even with the public sphere, we do have rules in this country. As a public employee, if I were in the military, I actually cannot criticize the president while I'm wearing uniform. If I am in one office, I cannot, I think it's the Hatch Act, right? Doesn't allow me to be partisan as a federal employee. If I'm an elected official in one office, I can't actually campaign in another office. So I would actually even argue there, maybe, that
but you're a university employee. You're paid with taxpayer dollars. If you said something that the administration didn't like and they fired you, would you be protected?
I don't think so.
Are you trying to get her fired right
Not
now,
at
Lindsay?
all.
What are you,
Not at all, but I
Are
want to...
we trying to get Leah in trouble?
Not at all, but
Okay.
I want to broach the subject.
No, I think it's
Taylor, what do you think? Oh, keep going,
No,
Leah,
it's okay.
too.
Go ahead.
No, it's a really good question. What I want to be careful about is overcorrecting to one side or the other here. I want to be really clear that my opinion is that, number one, this was cold-blooded murder, aggravated murder.
Allegedly.
No, allegedly, thank you. No matter what Charlie Kirk said, he did not deserve to be murdered, right? He didn't deserve that. And the left, on the other hand, is not to blame for this, right? I'm not going to go ahead and just blame all liberals for radicalizing Tyler Robinson. I'm not going to do that either. This is an individual who allegedly committed this crime, shooting and murdering, assassinating Charlie Kirk because of his opinions, right? So I want to take a step back and not blame anyone for what happened other than Tyler Robinson allegedly, right?
Right. So you're saying this is not an ideology per se, but one person chose to do this. We've heard Governor Cox say that before, right?
Yeah, and it is about speech, but at the same time it's not. Because no matter what Charlie Kirk said, his speech is free, and some have called some things he said hateful and offensive, and that's their right to say that. That's also free speech. But at the end of the day, speech is not violence. And no matter what someone says, there is no justification in resorting to violence.
Leah, do you agree with that sentiment?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You should not be resorting to violence. And I think so. I will just kind of, on the question that you asked and then Taylor stepped in, if I, as a university employee, say something in social media that makes students feel unsafe, then actually that speech shouldn't be protected, right? I'm now doing something that would make it that students might not want to come to my class, that might not want to be in the building that I'm in. So if that makes sense, Lindsay, right? Like, to a certain extent, as a public employee, we have expectations in our jobs. That First Amendment doesn't protect us if what our speech is doing makes it that we cannot actually do our job.
Sure. So I'm kind of painting with a broad brush when I say a university employee. I don't actually have the specifics of what they said, right? But they were an employee. So to your point, Leah, if that speech then put somebody else in danger or could be viewed as harmful, then they wouldn't be protected there, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. All right, one more kind of discussion I want to have on the Charlie Kirk assassination is whether either of you think there's any potential GOP bias in either the prosecution or the handling of this case, or maybe how does the administration avoid that appearance of bias? And I'll just point out some examples where potentially one could view it this way. Flags at half-staff after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. We didn't do that for 9/11 victims, and this happened near 9/11. Air Force Two carrying his casket, military honors moving his casket. None of this, again, done for those Democratic lawmakers, a state lawmaker that was killed in Minnesota. Are these examples of bias, or what do you guys think here?
So I actually think that Charlie Kirk is more of a national figure, Lindsay, if that makes sense. So
he deserved all of that.
I don't know that he deserved all of that, but I could draw a distinction between the Minnesota legislators and Charlie Kirk in that regard, right? Sure. So that I think vigils were held, flags were at half-mast in Minnesota, right? Totally appropriately. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say Charlie Kirk was a national figure, very close to President Trump. One of the prerogatives of the president is to use his office in this way. So a little bit, I don't know that Charlie Kirk deserved it, so I'm not answering that question, but I'm not sure I think it's bias or unexpected. And I think Utah reacting the way it did, man, this happened in our state. There was something very traumatic. I had students sitting in the front row at that event, and a little bit, I think all of us going all in on mourning it and being thoughtful about that actually helps healing inside of our state, which again, right, other things that we've seen didn't hit as close as to home maybe, and that might be where I could draw that distinction.
Yeah, Taylor, do you have any issue with taxpayer dollars here being used to, fly Charlie Kirk to Arizona? Is to Leah's point, is this just appropriate for the situation?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. I think it's absolutely appropriate. I actually think it's also cathartic. It's helpful, I think, for not only Utahns, but for Americans to process what happened and to even move on as a country. I think this was a significant political assassination in the history of America. Of course, Charlie Kirk wasn't an elected official per se, but he was one of the most influential conservative commentators in the country. Nearly 90 million followers across social media. Charlie Kirk's Turning Point organization that he started and built from the ground up is one of the most influential conservative organizations in the country. And it is absolutely accurate to say that Charlie Kirk and his efforts played a huge part in Donald Trump's re-election in 2020. So I do think it is the president's prerogative, as Leah said. I also think it is absolutely appropriate for our country because this isn't about left or right. This isn't about partisanship. This is about, I think, an influential voice in our country being assassinated for his speech. And I think it's important that as a country, we come together. And so I do think, flying his body on Air Force Two and J.D. Vance accompanying him, the flags at half-staff, I think all those things help us mourn as a country.
Producer Peter?
Yeah, just chiming in for a moment. Lindsay, when you mentioned the assassination of those Minnesota lawmakers, I went and just checked because that has been a bit of a topic of discussion lately. The comparison of the treatment there. It turns out a reporter did ask President Trump yesterday what his thoughts were as in to not lowering the flag, specifically for Melissa Hortman, the question asker said. And the president's response at that time was that he was not familiar with her case, but that had the governor of the state asked, he would have ordered the flags to have mast.
Okay.
I have not seen that Tim Walz has responded to that, though at the time, Trump's statement was that he had not contacted Walz because he thought it would be messy and counterproductive.
So
but
do we think Governor Cox reached out to President Trump and said, lower the flags?
I don't believe that would necessarily be the case here. I'm just wanting to include the president's latest statement on that exact question, just for completeness.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you guys have both disagreed that there's any bias here in the way this situation has been handled. Do you feel that same way about FBI?
Let me just
Director
be clear.
Cox Patel?
I wouldn't say there's no bias. I do think that clearly Charlie Kirk was very close to the president and to Vice President Vance and many who work in the White House. He was very close to them personally. He was seen as a family member of many in the administration, right? At least a political family in that sense. So is there bias? Yeah, but it's not inappropriate, I don't think. I don't think that bias is necessarily resulting in anything being done that is inappropriate.
Okay, I want to leave that discussion there because we have another major local topic that I want to get to, obviously not on the level of a political assassination, but here in Utah, all political eyes are on having to draw new congressional boundaries, and just recently, as we recorded this, the Utah Supreme Court has denied the legislature's request to halt that ruling altogether. Now, the Utah Supreme Court basically came out and said, you didn't make the right argument, legislature. They didn't argue, according to the Supreme Court, on the reasons why the lower court judge denied this stay. They argued instead on why they disagreed with her remedy in this case, being forced to draw new maps, essentially. Guys, what's next for the legislature?
They're drawing new maps.
Yeah.
Right, Taylor? I mean,
Is
they
there
have
another
to.
avenue for them to halt this thing?
Well, they could still appeal on the merits to the state Supreme Court, and they could also appeal to the United States Supreme Court. But if I were advising legislative leadership, I would say, just issue the maps. You're going to get off easy. What you don't want to do is appeal in such a way that the Supreme Court could come back and say you have to redraw all the maps now, including the legislative maps.
Right, because according to the judge's ruling, the reason we're in this situation is because lawmakers overturned Proposition 4, which was anti-gerrymandering criteria. So if they did that for the congressional maps, then the argument is all the maps are illegal.
Right. It is very easy for the legislature to provide new maps that comply with all the original standards of Proposition 4, and that also result in safe Republican districts still. So I assume that is what will happen. The legislature will release new maps. Those will be available later this month. The public will be able to see those on the legislative website. And ultimately, in the end,
The Republicans will win.
The result will be we will still have the same 4 Republican members of Congress.
Right.
Ben McAdams might run a slightly more competitive campaign for one of those seats, but he will still lose.
Well, and Leah, to that point, is the goal safe Republican seats, or should the goal be fair districts?
Oh my gosh, that is such a hard question.
Lindsay,
right at the
hold
end
on. Let
of
me
our
push back against this
conversation.
liberal media bias coming from Lindsay Ertz here.
That is not.
There, again, I can't stress this point enough. 1/4 as many Democratic voters in the state of Utah. There are 250,000
Which means
Democrats.
we have 4 congressional
There are
districts.
a million.
We have
That's
4
right.
congressional districts.
That's right.
If you take a look at Democratic voting data, 30% of Utah voters vote Democratic. So that means that
they don't.
1/4.
No, they don't.
But I just need to, we don't use proportional representation
Yes,
in the
we do
United
not.
States.
Okay.
So when you say are the districts fair or not, depends on how you define fair,
Right.
what criteria you're looking for.
So that's not a liberal question. That is the question.
I know. I'm
for you too, Taylor.
just giving you a hard time, Lindsay Ertz. You are the best political reporter in Utah, and you are not biased, okay? Yeah, thumbs up. But really, no one has ruled on gerrymandering. The judge didn't get to that. No one has No one in this
No one has
case
proved
has
harm.
proved harm
Right.
resulting from
And that
quote
is
unquote
accurate.
gerrymandering,
That is
right? That
accurate.
has not happened. So again, the legislature doesn't even need to consider partisanship. They can't legally, and they don't need to because, frankly, again, for the 100th time, I have to say, there are not enough Democrats in Utah to need to gerrymander.
But they're looking at voting data. That was just the point I was going to push back
Right.
on you. They're looking at
Yeah.
voting data, which says that 30% of people who voted in any recent statewide race voted for the Democrat in that race.
Sure, but is that because they're a Democrat or is that because of the candidate? Ultimately, in the end, Utah Democrats have got to field more competitive candidates. Otherwise, they will be left with no gains from the millions of dollars spent on this initiative and the litigation.
Leah, you agree?
Yeah. Well, the answer basically is the Democrats need to do a better job. They've got to build a party, which they haven't
Yeah.
done, and we've seen that in Utah, and we've talked about that.
At some
So
point, you can't sue your way into elected
you
office.
can't litigate into elected office. Right?
Interesting. Do you guys disagree on anything?
The Yankees.
Oh, the baseball team.
Yankees
baseball.
are terrible.
Wait,
terrible.
and you like the Yankees, Leah?
Yes, I'm a Yankees fan.
So we disagree.
Talk about bringing up a controversial topic right at
I'm
the
sorry.
end. The New York Yankees. Jeez.
Maybe that just makes me a good
Hold on,
journalist, that
hold
I ask
on.
good
Hold on.
questions.
Did I just get canceled from
we
the
got-
show? I've been
Folks,
removed.
folks,
If you're
our
watching
new
this-
camera
I've been removed. I've been canceled.
that we need two Lindsays.
deserve
I can
that.
see Democrats are paying the bills around
First
here.
of all, the
Oh, my
cameras are like
goodness.
automatic,
Stop
and
it.
that means that camera doesn't like you. Is what just happened.
Right now.
That was AI. That wasn't
was
me.
beautiful.
You can blame the
See?
machines, folks.
ChatGPT.
Guess what?
And we're on
We're
that.
out of time.
That beloved wide cam again.
Guess what? We're out of time. Taylor Morgan, Leah Murray, thank you for your insights today.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Producer Peter, always happy to have you here.
Thanks, everybody.
And as always, our Sunday show of Inside Utah Politics airs at 8 and 4 on ABC4, and we'd invite you to watch that here on our News for Utah Plus streaming app as well. Nobody invite this guy back to the show, and we'll see you next week.